That was Spider's Web, with their EP The Bus to Nowhere. One of my old favorites. Nothing else quite has the same mood. Makes you feel like you're absolutely alone in the city, wishing you could just talk to someone, anyone. OV paused, white-knuckling his microphone. It was an hour past midnight. The only ones listening in were a few foot soldiers of the Cricket Army infesting his old radio station. No one could stop him from mentioning the dull pain lingering behind his eyes, or the sour dreams, or the lethargy that pinioned his arms to his side, slowed his feet, threatened to drag him down through the concrete and into the black earth beneath. His paws had stretched long past the point of discomfort. But maybe I'm just reading too much into it. Anyway, it's that time of the night again, and I must leave you standing amid the streetlights. But don't get too lonely. I'll be back tonight at 10 p.m. Central. This has been DJ Overpressure with KWIND. Good night or good morning. Ovi flicked the switch, and the radio tones faded to static. For all 5 hours of the broadcast, he'd felt tight, like someone had tied a rope between his neck and the rafters. Now he needed out. He paused as he pulled on his jacket, a frayed remnant of recollection telling him it had once been from someone important. But his memories had long since been swallowed by the black fog of exhaustion. Ovi killed the station's power and pushed into the night, letting the cold rake its nails across his face. A thin layer of snow had settled across the station's parking lot, capping the sporadic street lamps, fuzzing the trees. From within the station, the Cricket Armada began its nightly symphony. It was 3 hours past midnight. He hoped no one would bother him as he made the long walk back to his basement apartment. At an hour like this, at this time of the year, there wasn't much chance of encountering anyone. Yet Ovi continued to watch each alley and dead end out of the corner of his eye. The scar on his side was a jagged reminder to keep alert. Ahead, two buildings huddled together for warmth, their windows black ovals. Between them snaked the gloomy alley to his apartment. Ovi walked quickly, passing an open dumpster and the misshapen trash bags beside it, past the shape of some small dead thing he intentionally did not look too hard at, and rounded the corner. Here, a set of stairs descended below ground level, ringed by a small metal guard fence. Beyond it, the masonry turned to a wall of shadow. Hurriedly, he descended the stairs, desperate to get out of the cold, even if all that awaited him was a dawn of bleary-eyed, unreachable slumber. But as he came to the bottom step, he heard the soft sound of bones rattling against ancient stones. He looked up. It was only there for a moment. Between the icy bars ringing the top of the stairwell, a head had extended. It had been oblong and its neck was too long, and the egg-shaped eyes that looked down on him were large and hungry. Nothing was there now. Yet he did not look away from the bars as he took the keys from his pocket and let himself into his apartment hallway. He still felt eyes upon him, even after he shut the door. His dreams were a monstrous haze. He was alone in an abandoned village. He was pursued by shambling creatures that he could never clearly see. He was in an empty church, and the massive stained glass windows before him shook and cracked with the sonorous vibrations of a massive thing lurking just beyond view. In the final dream, he was atop one of the impossibly high mountains towering over his city. His father had once shown him, through a telescope, the strange metal boxes built on spidery scaffolds that those mountains bore near their peaks. These structures massed all around him, gigantic forms skittering on hundreds of tiny metal limbs, coming closer and closer to where he hid with each passing moment. O.V. awoke choking, his lungs like dead leaves. The darkness around him seethed with implied movement. He reached for his lamp. Light fell over the room, revealing the refuse of a strained life. Piles of dirty laundry stood dark against the yellowing wallpaper, dwarfing an outdated computer on its three-legged desk. The familiar sight did little to ease the drilling pains behind his eyes. He slid from his bed and flicked on his computer. The sickly green of the interface seemed to reflect his own roiling stomach. There was one new email. Plagued by nightmares? Relief no longer just a dream. Despite the exhaustion, some vestigial shred of responsibility always forced O.V. out of bed and into the day eventually. But rarely so early, and never so deep into town. The face he surely had imagined last night remained burned into his vision. Amidst the crowd, he saw those two wide, hungry eyes, leering at him from the shadows, winking from creases and overcoats. He could feel the people looking at him, too, judging his shoddy clothes, his unshaven face, those deep, sunken eyes that an ex-lover had said gave him a prisoner's look. The crowd distrusted him. He distrusted the crowd. Wherever he walked, the buildings seemed to press in around him like prison walls. Each facade bore dozens of contradictory signs, making it impossible to gauge what he might encounter if he were to step beyond the dust-smeared glass doors of any one of them. Even in the warmth of day, cold foreboding crept beneath his skin. The email he had received was vague and unsteady, speaking of a Grillis Institute for Sleep Science that sought to medicinally remediate humankind's endmost affliction, the dwindling qualitative and quantitative nature of repose. It seemed almost written to put the reader to sleep. But OV eventually realized it was advertising some kind of study. A traveling pharmacist had returned with the trappings of a panacea found in the northernmost wastes and needed non-somnolent subjects predisposed to availing an end to their suffering. They were searching for guinea pigs to trial some miracle drug. If they'd felt the need to conceal their point with so much bloat and subterfuge, they must have had another, more nefarious purpose. But he was too tired to try to discover it, and long past the point of caring. Someone said his name. He jerked back as if stung, nearly toppling a lanky individual who recovered and continued down the sidewalk without stopping. But the noise had come from a nearby doorway, from a stone-faced woman in a monochrome uniform. Lost leaves scattered to the seven winds. Come in for your appointment or go home. She looked at him sidelong, as if trying to discern whether he was alive or dead. Waste is sinful. He looked at the burnt match in his hand. He had no memory of lighting it. Sorry. Come in for your appointment or leave. She was already walking away. The lobby of the Grillis Institute reminded him of his radio station. Dozens of pieces of technical equipment lay scattered seemingly at random, each instrument surrounded by nests of copper wire and broken bulbs. Only the linoleum floor and a faint chemical smell in the air gave any hint as to this being a medical building. Sir? OV sensed the uniformed woman was glaring at him, but her form was hazy. The whole room was hazy, white and brown and gray commingling on an oily canvas. Perhaps he'd spent too long in the daylight. At night he could almost stomach the exhaustion, but in the day it seemed to intensify, filling his head like smoke. As if he wasn't supposed to be out. I see. And how long have you felt this way? As long as I can remember. He was sitting in an office of some kind, and the white was nearly blinding, and he hadn't realized he had been speaking his thoughts. I wouldn't worry too much about that. It's very normal for someone of your predisposition. The barriers between mind and reality become abstract, light viewed through binoculars of tissue paper. For certain individuals, they become like gateways. The doctor's teeth were brilliantly white. Our goal with you is to force those gateways shut, to fuse the locks, to destroy the keys. You'll no longer have nightmares stabbing terror through your hearts. Obi blinked at the doctor in his white coat and his white teeth in the glaring white room. It seemed his eyes should have adjusted by now. I get these dreams because of open gates? In so many words, yes. The subliminal mind is an animal of the worst kind. The doctor smiled even as he clenched one fist around the other. Amorphous to a person, yet differently amorphous. Wily, troublesome, a creature to be kept in check with nets and cages and guns if needed, and the game changes from person to person. Oh yes, it changes. In the corner of the room, Ovi saw a small dark shape that he should not have been able to make out. A cricket lay on its back, its innards hollowed out. But I believe we've developed a new weapon in our war against the subliminal, the doctor continued, his voice a faraway echo in Ovi's ears. The medicine is untested, yes, but for you, with your medical history, your pattern of crippled romance, your routine of late-night duties, I cannot imagine you will not be the proper host. You are a framework, my friend, and on you we will hang the relief of hundreds of millions. A plastic bottle was shoved into his hands. It was bare but for a single rectangular label with bold black text. Somnipan. Take one at dusk and one at dawn. You will no longer dream. Your subliminal will be rounded up, cleaned out, and killed. Or it should be. It will be shown the door, and that should kill it. No place for the subliminal to go. I have no doubt this medicine will work. He was standing outside the Grillis Institute, a pen in his hand, signing away rites of some sort. The hard-faced nurse snatched it from him the moment he was finished signing. As he watched her go, a question bubbled up and broke free of the weary haze. How'd you know to contact me? The doors slammed shut. A snowflake landed on his cheek, and it was a cold and foreign thing. And again, that last track was Bones of Martyrs by Black Plains Wanderers, off their new album Ulysses. Well, it's that time of night, or morning, and that means I'll have to leave you dancing in the dark. But try not to let that interrupt your rhythm. I'll be back again tonight, 10 p.m. Central, sure as the world turns. This has been DJ Overpressure with KWIND. Good night or good morning. Ovi took his headphones off and closed his eyes, waiting for the crickets to sing. When they did not, he opened his eyes, scanning the dark corners of the recording area for the source of whatever had disturbed them. But amidst the discarded boxes and broken equipment, there was nothing. The silence was so complete he could hear his heart thudding in his chest. He shifted in his seat, and the medicine bottle in his pocket rattled, denting the silence. He'd taken the first somnipan dose as close to sundown as he could approximate, given the funeral shroud of gray that always engulfed the city. In the hours that had passed, he'd felt nothing but the recurrent prickles of anxiety. Ovi turned the bottle in his hands. No instructions, no warnings, just the word somnipan in 2 large lettering. Uncapping the bottle, he shook out a white oblong pill, then, after a moment's hesitation, another. He swallowed both. Tonight was the 3rd weekend of the month, which meant handyman work. It should have been someone else's task, but the station was budgeted entirely through a shoestring city fund, meaning that Ovi had little recourse but to do what he was told. At least he didn't have to climb the crooked broadcasting tower. Some part of him was sure that if he ventured into the monolithic cloud cover, he would never come back again. His first duty, checking the breaker fuses, took him to a storage room at the station's rear. Within, a caged bulb spat sickly gray light across the room's many cabinets, barely outshining the dust-choked beams issuing from a lone window overhead. Outside, the wind began to roar, and the window shivered as cold fingers probed its rivers of cracks. He opened the breaker box, flicked the switch marked Store 1. Darkness rushed to fill the hallway outside. From here he could see the dark outlines of stacked boxes in the room across the way. OV leaned down and flicked the next switch, visible only by the weak light of the overhead window. And by the light he saw that the room across the way, where nothing had been moments before, now had an occupant. It was spindly and pale and humanoid, white and thin, naked and knobby, and looking at him with 2 large eyes that glinted like razor blades in the gray light. A hallucination, more vivid than the one last night. OV flipped the breaker back on, suffusing both rooms with light. The hallucination was impossibly real. A head with an infant's black bristle hair bulged at the end of a foot-long neck, and the jaws that drooped open bore teeth like broken glass. Its frame was all bones, tight flesh against rib and pelvis, and its forearms and calves were distended with thick muscles, each limb ending in murder. It was still looking at him, cranking its head farther and farther sideways until its eyes were below, its teeth above. Exhaustion froze him more than terror. The moment stretched into a tortured second, too. At any point the thing would vanish like it had so many times before. It hooked its neck, tilting its head to be perfectly horizontal. It did not blink. He saw himself cross the room, come to the door, push it closed. There came the muffled sound of movement, then a deafening crash as the thing slammed against the door. Ovi had to use his entire body weight just to keep from being sent sprawling. And all the while his fear was a distant sensation, whether in a city the world over. His hands shook as he turned the deadbolt. Another impact came, then another, the door nearly buckling inward with each crash. He was already moving up and away, the electric rush of adrenaline aiding his sluggish limbs. One of the cabinets was close enough to the window for him to make his escape. The icy metal sent a jolt through his still sluggish body. Clambering up, Ovi perched on the cabinet and strained toward the window. It was just out of his reach. Behind him, the door finally exploded. Yet it was the second sound, the rapid slapping of naked flesh against wooden floorboards closing in, that forced him to move. He kicked off the cabinet wildly and slammed into the window. Broken pieces of old fiberglass slashed into his cheek and brow, the fragments of window seemingly keen on vengeance for the obliterated door. Something grabbed at his foot but failed to latch on. He dragged himself free, grasping in the snow, and lurched to his feet. Panic was a mad pilot working his muscles for him, taking him down one blind alley, then another. Before he could realize it, the streets had turned suddenly unfamiliar. He was moving in a foreign direction, everything bathed in a medicinal orange, almost red, issuing from the street lamps. The shuddering wind had become a blowing gale, and sleet rained from the sky like bullets. Strange backstreets gave the twisted, uncertain byways, the signposts brimming with faded signs in a language he did not recognize. Blood poured from the cuts on his face, more blood than such small cuts should have produced, and his face was too numb, and the blood was cooling, freezing his cheeks and jaw. From an alley nearby, he heard muffled voices and made the mistake of turning to look. 2 figures stood, silhouetted by a burning barrel, clustered close around a jerry-rigged radio that squealed into the night. Ovi heard his own voice too close to his ears. "You will die in 6 years, 4 months, 2 days on the stroke of midnight. You will die in utter solitude without even insects to bear witness to your death. Not even maggots will touch your body." One of the figures jerked to look at him, its hood falling back just enough for him to see. What stood on its neck was a black mass, emptier than a starless sky on the harshest night of winter. It did not move, but slid closer to him at an impossible speed, reaching forward with its knobby arms. Not trying to pull him in, but trying to enter him. Somehow he knew that if it touched him, every impossibility of the night would become a permanent reality. Ovi ran. Overhead, the murderous storm quieted for the barest instant, letting a beam down from the sickle moon. He stood before the stairwell leading to his apartment. Ovi stepped forward and staggered, nearly fell, but did not slow his pace until he reached his door. This time, as he slipped his keys from his pocket and let himself in, he kept his head down. Now he knew better than to look. The blood would not wash from his jacket. No matter how much water he used, the stains lingered, damning remnants of a night that could not have happened. From one of his drawers, he found a pair of tweezers and used them to painfully dig the few remnants of broken glass from his many cuts, which he bandaged in a sloppy and slipshod way. Mercifully, his conscious mind had been subsumed by its more capable passenger. Tonight, it decreed he would sleep in his shower. Any attempt at deciphering what had transpired tonight could wait. He lay curled in a ball on the cold tile, waiting for the black hand of sleep to close around him and take him away from the soft yellow light of the bathroom. Yet sleep did not come. First he took it to be the terror, or perhaps the discomfort of an unfamiliar sleeping place. But he'd slumbered in the shower before, and exhausted as he was, he could have slept outside were it not for whatever lurked beyond. Something was different. Something was wrong. He could feel the time stretching, minutes to hours rotting away. Despair and a new kind of fear, a hot, wet fear, began to flow within him like blood from a torn vein. Half muffled by the bathroom door, he heard an electronic ping. Someone had emailed him. A minute passed, then came another. And another. Soon it was a wall of notifications, electric sounds like mechanical insects infesting his bedroom. He moved unsteadily as he stepped from the bathroom, half expecting to see the thing from the radio station standing right before him. But there was nothing out of the ordinary. Filthy bed and trash-strewn nightstand awash in the glow of his monitor. He looked at it. 73 new emails, all with the same subject. Return to Grillis Institute. Now. At each bump in the road, the floor of the ambulance gave a dry, rattling sound, like leaves in the wake of a bicycle. He was ankle-deep in the shells of desiccated crickets. I simply don't understand why you didn't feel it necessary to share your weakness of character with us. The doctor was still smiling, but his eyes were filled with a kind of mock hurt. Please list all prior medical conditions, surgeries, medications. Don't you think that your physicians deserve to know of your peculiar manner of dreams? If you were an alcoholic, wouldn't you think it necessary to mention that before an emergency hepatectomy? Ovi blinked, looked out the van's tinted window. On either side of them, the olive hands of massive trees reached from a bank of fog. He had no memory of entering this vehicle. Well, of course not, the doctor said. With your condition, do you truly believe you could have made it to the Institute without aid? We chose to intercept you, rather than let you fall prey to the situation of your own creation. Naturally, our intercession will need to be repaid in full. A recollection swam listlessly into Ovi's head. The drug. I took more than I should have. The doctor snorted at him, and his grinning face was suddenly unfriendly, almost gloating. You can't overdose on locking a door. A strange half-response. He saw the door swing closed, shutting out the monsters in his nightmares, and the comforting darkness in which they lingered. Was the medicine why I couldn't sleep last night? Yes, the doctor spat, waving dismissively. You may still feel the need to slumber, but you will be able to no longer. And such a boon is more than you deserve, you with your pre-existing condition causing my department so many headaches. What the hell are you talking about? Ovi hissed, anger momentarily slashing through the fog of his confusion. The doctor clicked his teeth. He opened his mouth to answer, but just as he did, the van lurched to a stop. Out the window, Ovi saw that the clouds were thicker and closer than before. For a moment they parted, and over the edge of an abyss, Ovi saw the town in miniature, far in the distance below. They'd driven high into the mountains. We're here, the doctor said, nodding to Ovi as if there was something he had agreed to do. What? The door slid open behind him, and he turned to find himself looking up the barrel of a rifle. He was jerked to his feet by a mass of camouflage and pouches and stale tobacco smoke, and walked out into the cold. Somewhere a barbed wire voice grunted threats, punctuating them with the barrel of its gun. Ahead the road turned to gravel, then dirt, and on every side a phalanx of dying trees pressed close. Ovi's eyes were drawn to the gaps between the gnarled trunks, searching for some sign of the thing from last night. And though he did not see it, he could almost feel it, like a hand tightly gripping his shoulder. A low buzz began to build in the back of Ovi's mind. Beyond the trees ahead, the fog darkened, revealing a massive shape aloft on twisted supports. Each step toward the shape sent blades of electricity through Ovi's skull, until finally he fell, convulsing, to the dirt. Something, the soldier, the doctor, pulled him on, and the harsh pain became a squealing agony. Through the delirium of torture, Ovi was certain his eardrums would burst. But the moment he was dragged through the periphery of what appeared to be a building, the moment he saw a metal ceiling and felt the concrete beneath his head, the agony vanished. Around him was his recording studio. No, a near-exact replica, complete with dust, his trash-strewn broadcasting desk, and the nest of electrical wires snaking behind the transmission equipment. But the walls were built of a strange black metal broken only by windows thick as a fist, and floodlights belched light down upon him from above. He heard the screech of metal, then a shuddering bang as the entry door shut behind him. On the other side, through a small porthole, he could see the doctor's 2 white teeth chattering, and his voice was fuzzed as if coming through a radio. The average subconscious is a wicked, vestigial thing, like a fifth limb. In the holy trinity of ego, superego, and id, there is no space for it. Yours, subjected as it has been to an eternity of near death, a twilight of half-conscious nights poisoned by isolation, should have made you an ideal candidate for our research. Yet you failed to mention that your subconscious adapted. Your wandering dreams, your nomad nightmares, they should be dead through the medication, but they are not. Instead, they have simply relocated. The doctor straightened his coat. The city is not safe from one of your ilk. Thus, as your subconscious wiles have been relocated, so too have you. And you shall pay for this lodging, rest assured, just as you will pay for your regular Somnipan doses. Before you protest, best think for a moment. The doctor's grin was skeletal. After all, your nightmares have tasted true freedom. Imagine what might happen if they tried to find their way back inside you. He was gone, and Ovi rose shakily. Some part of him felt obligated to scream, rage against his forced incarceration. But he was tired. He would always be tired. And any lingering thought of rebellion vanished as he crossed the floor to look outside the wide window on the far side of the room. The fog had not cleared, and the day had turned to night. Yet he could see the entirety of the town, his apartment, buildings like headstones, the crooked spire of the radio station where he had mumbled away so many hours in the dark. And above the town, around him, were the mountains, and on those mountains were dozens of steel boxes on their spidery supports. Steel boxes very much like the one he was now imprisoned within. From a spot near the front door came a small, sharp ping. A computer display, much like the one from his home, blinked back at him. One new email. The radio man must earn his keep. Ovi looked out of the porthole into the dying forest shrouded in gray. There, almost out of view, stood an emaciated white figure. A familiar figure. He turned away from the door, the display crossing to the desk in the center of the room where a pair of headphones lay. With a long, shuddering sigh, he sat down at the chair, lifted the headphones to his ears, and began the broadcast. Coming to you alive and awake, this is DJ Overpressure with KWIND. I'm happy to have you. Going to keep the track list mellow for the night. Give you something to sleep to. Or maybe it's something for me to sleep to. Hope springs eternal and all that. First up is Mr. Aphid with Find Me a Home Away from Home. I think you'll really enjoy it. Near but invisible, a solitary cricket began its lonesome song.